Welcome to DEIJ Hot Takes. My name is Daryl Sinclair, and this is the podcast where we discover the bold and transformative ideas shaping diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice work today. In this episode, we are joined by Joel Llaban, the Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Justice at International School Services. Joel, thank you so much for joining us today and making the time. It's been a while in the making. If you could please share with us what your hot take and what your focus is for today.
Yeah, thank you, Daryl. This is really a joy and an opportunity to be in conversation with you and community with you. We've had a lot of conversations previously prior to the recording of our podcast, but it's really so wonderful to just be here, have a conversation, and talk about some of the thoughts that we have today. So thank you. My hot takes today would be I think leaders must inquire, interrogate, and redesign the systems we've inherited. We look into centering identity, confronting inequity, and creating the conditions where belonging is not an accident, but a guaranteed outcome for all of our students and members of our community. So, given that, I think about not really just talking about identity that divides school, but it's really about the refusal to redesign the systems that never really included everyone in the first place.
Well, that is a powerful hot take to guide your work. There's a few key points there already. So what I'd like to ask you is if you take us through this hot take and perhaps some of the ideas of that we've discussed prior to this already, but the deep understanding of self, why this focus on leadership and the responsibilities of leadership and agency, why you feel this is a hot take. Is this not being done elsewhere? And how do you make this happen in the work that you do? Where are some examples where we might see this happening in the excellent work that you're doing?
There is a responsibility of school leaders to think about not only of understanding systems, but also more importantly, because our systems in our communities are made up of people who have diverse identity markers and diverse histories and diverse stories. And I think it is important for school leaders to be inquirers of identities, not only identities of other people or the people they serve or the students they serve, but also of their own identity and how their positionalities, how their history, the power they hold has an impact and influence on their leadership and on the educational outcomes of the students they serve. It's important for us to continue to expand that aperture of seeing and celebrating diverse identities and stories. And it's not only looking from a place of or starting from a place of marginalization and harm, but also looking at a place of affirmation, of celebration, of excellence, of diverse identities. And I think looking at that not only with stories, but also with not only with identities, but also with stories. So how do we continue to build our knowledge of others, our knowledge of ourselves? How do we continue to nurture our leadership competencies to be equity designing leaders? And so to me, based on the question that you have, Daryl, I really want to talk about identity, not as a side conversation for leaders, but also as a very starting point of learning. In schools, we talk about learning identities of our students as being mathematicians or scientists or readers, but there's so much more that are invisible to the students we teach and serve and lead. That includes also the adults who we serve, teach, and lead. In too many schools, students are asked to check or leave parts of themselves at the door. Either their names are shortened, or their names are changed, or their language are treated as either an obstacle or a deficit. Their histories are invisible in curriculum, including all the other intersections and overlapping parts of their identities. And then we wonder why they disengage, because many of our students are only seeing themselves they're only looking at stories and identities of others from the lens of others. They're viewing it from windows. We need to have more mirrors. We need to have mirrors in the adults around them, because we know that our own stories as adults and as leaders are also mentor texts for our children. They're not only reading from the prints that we have, but also from our behavior, who we silence and who we amplify, who we support, who we include and exclude. Children are reading our behaviors and our actions. And so when we are mindful about our own identities, it supports in developing the competencies of our students and the adults around us to be empathetic, to be inclusive, to be equitable, in their own practices. And so I'm gonna start with that because that in itself is a leadership competency. Many of our leadership experiences or leadership education often are sometimes they are transactional, they are technical, and they are important. From financial management to business and operations to curriculum skills and all of the other technical parts of what we do as leaders in schools, but also relationship and trust and the understanding of people, the relationship we build with others are important leadership competencies. And the more we become mindful about the stories and identities of our community, the more we know how we can be of support to the struggles and the successes of our community members.
Thank you for putting that together. There's a lot of complexity in what you've said, but there's a theme running through with the language that you've used, which I really want to grab hold of. I mentioned this when we were speaking before, but that inquirers of identity, this through line that you've got where the work that leaders are doing needs to also respect self, needs to engage with identity intentionally and use it as a guiding star for the work that's being done, even with respect to the different, I'll call them the different hats that leaders have to wear. Like you said, the business side of things, the recruitment side of things, so on and so forth. But as we see this building, I wouldn't even call it complexity, this refined focus which will protect the community. What might be the role for the community in that situation as we teach and we try to support our leaders engaging in this approach? What might be the parallel teaching that we're doing for the community to help them to hold those leaders in a positive sense accountable and support them in doing these things?
Yeah, I'm going to start with this hot take around we don't learn despite who we are. I think we learn through who we are. And I think it is everybody's responsibility and agency and accountability to be supportive of each other. And I think when leaders support their community members also have the obligation, responsibility to support their leaders. And so it's about that reciprocal accountability, holding each other accountable. We don't learn despite who we are; we learn through who we are. And I believe in the whole idea of being reciprocal or critical friends and critical partners in holding each other accountable in the work that we do in support of the educational outcomes and safety of our students and our community, as well as the safety of each other. It doesn't only mean that it's a leader's responsibility to hold other people accountable. We hold each other accountable in supporting the educational outcomes of our students. And so that's why, to me, I believe that identity centered learning, being conscious about who we are, being aware about our own identities and our own positionalities, is not an extra or an add on. It's not just for special occasions or for marginalized groups or identities. It's really the foundation of meaningful and culture responsive education for our student learners and also for adult learners. And so I think it's important that when we think about when students see themselves reflected in the curriculum, when adults see themselves as well reflected in the community's lifeways, in the classroom norms, in the collaborative norms, in how knowledge is valued and whose stories are told, I think we feel safe to take risks. In taking risks, in that contributes to a culture of psychological safety. And when we have that psychological safety, it becomes normalized that we hold each other accountable for the work that we do. And so it's really not just about cognitive accountability. It really is about emotional and relational accountability with each other. It's almost like, hey, let's be critical friends. When I've said something, when I've done something, hold me accountable, like call me in,
Mm.
support me in my own growth. And I think that humanizes education, that humanizes the work that we do, moving from technical and transactional into to a relational, humanizing education community.
Well, I would almost say becoming inquirers of identity. If you, as you've positioned, if you focus on not solely on that, but if you have that as a strong guiding motivation for the work that you're doing and you're learning about each other, you will build relationships where there is trust, which makes it far easier and more natural to hold each other accountable, to question what each other is doing or is planning on doing, and that reciprocal environment where everyone is holding each other accountable because of the inherent trust and the inherent learning about each other through a lens of identity. I have a couple of questions that I've been thinking thinking about. But with the wealth of it, with the role that you have, the position that you have, and the work that you've done with so many schools around the world, but it looks like in reality, different expressions of people being inquirers of identity, of people being reciprocal and held accountable. What comes to mind for you out of what you've seen in all of the schools that you've visited and worked with, or the leaders you've worked with?
How we relate to others and the decisions we make and the policies and practices we develop, we envision, we design are shaped by our own experiences, by our own education, by our own views of what education can look like and what learning can be and should be. And they're also deeply influenced by historical and systemic and institutional structures. And so for educators and leaders to be identity aware, to be identity conscious, to be identity centered means we recognize that who we are shapes how we teach our own race, our gender, our language, our beliefs, our own socialization. All of it influences what we center, what we ignore, how we interpret student behavior, what we define as rigor, what we define as respect, what we define as normal, what we define as successful. And all of these definitions are deeply informed by identities and history and structures. And so I think when we think about examples and practices, many of those schools and organizations who have developed equity centered design for their own organizations and schools have been developed at an exponential growth because it is a result of leaders being aware of who they are, their positionality, their awareness of the world around them, but also the world within their own community. So it's not only about looking from outside, but also looking from within, understanding their own context, where they are, where they were, and where they hope their communities to go and be. And so identity conscious and identity awareness, identity centeredness, it's not only about being, it's not a static identity, but it's really an evolving identity. And so the way we see culture, particularly because many of us who work and live and thrive in our national community, in our national schools, we are in places where identities and cultures overlap. And how we see others is influenced by also how we see ourselves.
Now, what when we see ourselves reflected in the community, what should take priority? Should it be our sense of self and ensuring that we have an equitable space to represent and perform our own identity? Or is there a point at which the identity and the needs of the community takes first place to the point whereby we may need to put our own identity needs, I'll say broadly, or the ways that we express ourselves to the side? Is there any case in which that might happen, or any experience that you may have had where you've been at a school and you've needed to think to yourself, actually right now, the point at which this school is experiencing, the focus needs to be on the community as a whole? Where do we decide what the priority should be?
Yeah, I'd say it's a concurrent work. They really overlap. The more we know about ourselves, the more we also view our systems differently. The more we know about our systems, the more we also reflect about how who we are and the power that we hold influence the development of the design of the system. So I used to think, Daryl, that it is self to systems, that I cannot be supporting the transformation of the system only until I have reached that level of like self transformation of self authorship. But it's really about a consistent it's a consistent process of understanding self in order to understand systems, and understanding systems in order to understand self. And it's a constant. It is not, there's no sort of an endpoint there because the world is evolving. The educational outcomes of our students are also evolving. And we are also, our schools are influenced by the growing trends and patterns and development of technology and emerging technology and media. And all of these are within our obligation in our schools to support our students in developing their own equity literacy, inclusion literacy, identity literacy. And so for me, I see this one as really a constant overlap. However, through that overlap, we also need to be mindful that for us to be able to support other people, I think Dr. Dina Simmons said this one, that we cannot give students what they need or our communities what they need if we don't ask them what they need. So my thinking around this is that for us to be mindful about the educational outcomes or the equity outcomes of our community when we think about systems is that we need to be having more conversations and listening to our community in order for us to design an equity outcome that is supportive, aligned, and responsive to the needs of our community. And that includes ourselves too as leaders. And through those listening, my hunch is that leaders will learn more about themselves and they will also learn more about others. And so that's why it's important that we look into a variety of frameworks around how we learn about others, how we see culture and identities, how we see the world in a decolonial mindset is also important. That our stories are not the only stories that we hold, and that our story is part of the puzzle of a much wider world that has so many stories and ways of being and ways of knowing and ways of living and ways of loving. All of these is so diverse. And so when you work at international schools, your identity is part of the puzzle. It's one piece of the puzzle of the many different peoples that you work with and serve. And so how do we provide space for other people's puzzle to be there in the middle alongside our own stories?
I think you've given it already, and I hope it's not repetitive to make this request of you. But with all of the wonderful things you've shared and the little bites which will hopefully take root in people's minds as they listen, what for you might be a key takeaway for a listener? So we've got a good length episode here. We've got lots of fantastic things that you've shared. But if someone had just this last couple of minutes of the episode, what might be a key resource, perhaps a key reflective question or consideration that you would like someone listening to take away from what you've said so far today?
Yeah, when we talk about identity, it's not really about forced disclosure. It's not really about asking people to reveal parts of who they are, but it's really about the agency to tell their own stories. And when we listen more to the stories of our community, we are better positioned to support in the design of equity, of inclusion, of belonging. Yeah. I'll end with that. And Daryl, thank you for this opportunity. I also just would like to share that in the work that we do with international school services, our role is to really be a part of the puzzle within the wider international school community. And so for 3 years now, we have been developing a program called Learning to Action. It's really all of these that we talked about, starting out with self, all the way to transforming systems. And it is now beginning next year, next school year. We are now entering our fourth year. And the main focus there is really about building leadership capacity and competencies um, in support of designing caring, courageous, and critical change making within the international school community. So I hope that to our community who are listening here, if they have not been part of Learning to Action, this is an invitation to everybody to be a part of it. And we've got a great set of leaders who will be there facilitating our learning and our action taking. Yes, thank you, Daryl.
Well, thank you so much, Joel, for sharing with us today. For the people listening, I'll place links. Joel, please share with me links to the Learning to Action course, but I'll put that in the description and other ways that you can connect with Joel and explore the ideas and the work that's been shared today. And overall, just a big thank you for watching or listening. And I will see you on our next episode of DEIJ Hot Takes. Thank you, Joel.